Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is Shawn Fausett of Colorado. For me, there are some Phish shows that I've always taken for granted as being part of the assumption that Phish is one of the greatest bands of all time, that they have a certain DNA, a list of shows maybe, that help prove that fact, or at least that opinion. Every fan may have his or her own list, but I just always assumed for some reason that there are some canon shows that are inarguably great with a capital G, that we all agree upon these as the best. And for this episode, Shawn picked one of those shows, at least the one that's on my list, December 6th, 1996 at the Aladdin in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's been released as an official triple album by Phish. It was their first show in Sin City. There's a Harpua encore, complete with special guests, and jams galore. In my Phish history, it's also one of my very first tapes. It's probably the first time I ever heard some of the greatest Phish songs ever written. But for Shawn, it was much more personal. It was the time when he decided that he was all in on this goofy band from Vermont. Shawn was 16 years old at the time. He had just seen his first Phish show a few months prior, and Vegas was all he needed to become submerged into the world of Phish. So let's go over the reputation of 1996, reap the benefits of the Clifford Ball, and feel the spirit of Elvis everywhere, as Shawn Fausett tells about December 6th, 1996 at the Aladdin in Las Vegas. Shawn, welcome to Attendance Bias. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You picked a really great show today that I have a personal history with, even though I wasn't there. It was one of my first tapes ever. It was the first time I heard a whole bunch of Phish fan favorites, including favorites of my own. So I have this kind of personal connection to this show because I got into it and I first heard it right after I got into Phish. I got into Phish the summer of 96. And so once I started getting into tape collecting and moving away from the albums, this show, December 6th, 96 at the Aladdin, was kind of my introduction to the wider world of Phish. So I never have spoken to anyone who has actually been to this show. So I can't wait to hear your impressions of it.
Oh, this will be great.
Yeah. So first, let's hear a little bit about you and a little bit about your Phish fandom with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Nice.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So Shawn, tell us a little bit about your Phish background. When was the first time you saw them live?
The first time I saw them live was 8/2/96 at Wolf Mountain Amphitheater in Park City, Utah. It was the beginning of Summer Tour 96. And it was great because, you walk onto the lot and it was a beautiful summer day. And we got inside the venue, and over the venue was the double rainbow to start the summer tour. And then Paige comes out on a theremin and plays Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So it was an excellent way to start my Phish adventure.
And so how much did you know about them before you went to that show?
I had been listening to them until about from 1995-ish. My friend had a bunch of tapes that he had stolen from his older brother. And we would just sit in my buddy's basement and alternate between a live one and some of the studio albums and the Gamehenge tape. I think we had the Bomb Factory tape, which was great as well. So I was kind of familiar with a little bit of the lore, but there was definitely a lot of songs that I still hadn't heard by that point.
There's always an older brother or a cousin or a camp counselor, right? It's always one of those three. So did you grow up in Utah? Is that where you're originally from?
Yeah, born and raised in Utah. I currently live in Colorado, but it was, a great place to live. Culturally, it's a little bit much, especially as a Phish fan. But yeah, it was nice. And this was the first show I'd ever traveled to, the Vegas show. 5-6 hour drive, got me and my buddies all together and headed out there. It was great.
So I've never spoken to a fan from Utah, even though you're not from there any longer. Mm-hmm. I have to ask, did you go to that Dark Side of the Moon show?
Oh yeah. It was great. It was there was probably 3,000 people in attendance. And I had to swear that 100 of them at least were my high school buddies. So it seemed just a hometown show with all of your friends, and my friends would bring their dads and stuff. So it was just I knew everybody. I had a couple of friends that had only been into Phish just a little bit, and they were kind of actually bothered by it because they like, we want to hear Phish. And I'm like, who cares? Let's play Dark Side. I was at the Halloween before that as well. That show was great too, but it was as crazy as as you hear on the tape.
I'm telling you now, and it's on record, you're going to have to come back after we talk about this Vegas 96 show and talk about that Harpua Dark Side of the Moon show, because
I would love to do that.
That show has lived in my imagination for years and years. And now, without going on too much of a tangent, everyone knows the Dark Side part, but there's so much more to that show.
Yeah. The Smells Like Teen Spirit, like encore after the fact, and
The Tube, Jesus Left Chicago.
Oh, it's so good.
Okay.
So, one of the top 10 shows I've ever been to.
We'll get there. So,
always play great in Utah.
Oh, yeah. As seldom as they do, it's always worth it to see them. So your first show was August 2nd, 96. What's your most recent show, and what did you think of it?
My most recent show was the Sci-Fi Soldier Halloween set, and I just loved it. I know a lot of people aren't fans of it. It's a little repetitive, but I was way back in that back, and you could just tell that the band was having fun. And like, that's what it's all about for me. I just want to see them having fun, and it increases my enjoyment like by 100%. Like, the songs are great. What was it? Knuckle Bone Broth Avenue, just right out of the gate to get things started. And I hit all four shows, and it was just, what a run. I love the themed shows too, so it like fit all of them right in. It's great.
Me too. And what you said resonates, because when the band is having fun, I mean, Trey is the most visible. He's the most expressive physically, for sure. I would probably argue that Fishman is the most expressive vocally when he's having fun. But when Trey is dancing, or you see that, ear to ear grin on his face, and he's stomping back and forth, whether it's first tube or whatever, that immediately translates to the crowd, and it makes the whole show better. They feed off each other.
Exactly. So when I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, that show sucked," and I was like, "Were you there? It was fun. It was just fun."
If you had to pick one and you had to get rid of the other two for the rest of the year, would you pick Summer Tour, Fall Tour, or the New Year's Eve run?
I've never done the New Year's Eve run. Something about winter in New York and the craziness is a little too much for me, and I've never had the chance, being a West Coast person. Fall Tour, they have some fun shows, but I prefer Summer Tour. It's nice out. The weather's typically great. You have that summer feeling. It lends itself to a lot of like outdoor amphitheaters, as opposed to like sometimes stuffy indoor theaters like MGM.
I'm interested in what you said, that you said that New Year's in New York in the cold weather would be a little bit too much for you. I've never seen Phish in Vegas. So to me, Phish and Halloween in Las Vegas, that seems like it would be too crazy for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
For me, it's just the temperature. Like, I don't want to be cold.
Oh, that's a different story. Okay.
In Vegas, for me, I've done most of the Halloweens in Vegas, and it just feels like a small little city if you're in one of those 4 casinos around, or the hotels around there. You take a 10-minute walk to the venue, you see all the fans along the way. And being in the Vegas 96 show was crazy, because there was a rodeo in town at the same time. So all the elevators were full of like cowboys and Phish fans. And then all the normal people are like, what is going on this weekend? Like, what is happening?
I love when stuff like that happens. At the Mohegan Sun shows in 2019, there was also a Little Miss beauty pageant going on at Mohegan Sun at the same 2 nights that Phish was playing. And you want to talk about some weird cross-pollination or some weird shared elevators.
I bet.
It was quite a scene.
Those dance moms should be at the show.
Right. They it was weird. If you had your druthers, you could walk in and pick your spot. What's your favorite spot in the venue to see a show?
I'm definitely Page side, Reach side. Page was a huge factor of me loving Phish. I just never heard like his sort of keys in a rock band before. And he's so handsome. You get over there, and so that's the side I prefer to hang out on.
Page side is the classy side.
Yeah.
In conversation, is it You Enjoy Myself, YEM, or YEM?
Oh my gosh. I think I alternate between YEM and Yem. I'll probably say YEM though. I was going to say, if there's someone I'm talking to about Phish that doesn't know it, they wouldn't know it anyway. So YEM, yeah.
What's a venue that you've never been to, but you would love to go see Phish?
Madison Square Garden. Like I just watching those shows in April this last month and all of the Halloweens and everything I hear about it just sounds so great. I'm kind of kicking myself for not going in April when the weather was nice. And
It was the greatest.
yeah, exactly. But we had already bought a bunch of our Dick's tickets and everything. So, and we weren't sure if we were going to get tickets since they were transferred over, but someday we're going to make it there.
Speaking of venues, I have never been to Utah, and I have a feeling that I'm missing out. What are some good concert venues, whether or not they're in Salt Lake City, but around the state, that if I went on vacation and was in Utah, that I should look for a show to go see at that venue, regardless of who's playing?
That's a pretty good question. There's not a lot of good venues. I think the best one at the moment is the USANA Amphitheater. Phish played there in 2003. The Wolf Mountain Amphitheater got torn down. It's just now a ski resort. And Park City had a good one that was pretty good. In Salt Lake, you have the E-Center, which Phish has also played at. And I think that they played at like the Convention Center in 95, but they're all kind of like hockey rinks, basically. USANA is cool though, because they sometimes will allow camping outside of it. And you get that amphitheater feel.
What is your favorite post-show snack?
At the moment, it's Christie's Quesadillas. I make a beeline right after the show for that. If it wasn't something specific like that, though, I would default to cold veggie burritos and a Pabst. Just, nice little thing.
I commend you on your specificity of a Pabst, because I feel like something that watery and delicious after a show, and if it's cold, it comes out of one of those watery ice coolers. Yeah. I could taste it right now.
Oh yeah,
it could be the most refreshing drink.
Way in, and that's too much. So just something a little to get me to the campground or to my car that I'm not driving.
Sure. And what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
This is a hard question for me. I was going to talk about how I love the serendipity of Phish and how there's like so many like coincidences not being coincidences, but I'm going to have to say that's not the weirdest thing. The weirdest thing was definitely the yodelers at 12/6/96. I've never seen something like that or heard it on a set list or anything. And it was just such a surprise to me. Like Primus, the Elvises, that kind of fits, but the yodelers, totally out of place. So yeah, I think that is probably the weirdest thing I've seen at a show, not including like the audience or anything, but I feel like Phish and weirdness are kind of the same. Like it's almost, weirdness is almost normalized.
Right, normal is weird.
Yeah, exactly. So when I think about it, the yodelers were just like out of the blue. And that Malachi was at the show from Children of the Corn. I don't remember his name. Courtney Gaines.
Courtney Gaines, yeah.
Yeah, like, wait, what?
When was this show played?
The 96 Fall Tour began October 16th in Lake Placid, so we're all the way on the East Coast. That was the first show since the Clifford Ball, which I think I would argue is the most important Phish event or Phish show in their history up to that point. Even more so, I think, than Madison Square Garden New Year's Eve 95.
Yeah.
It just set a whole new level for them.
I don't even think I ever heard 95 until like probably, 10 years ago, but I definitely listened to the Clifford Ball after the fact.
Yeah, the Clifford Ball was a statement of who this band is and where they're going. Kind of when I wasn't there, but I could say we, the royal we, when we realized how many of us there actually were and how dedicated we all were, because it was in Plattsburgh, which is not an easy place to get to.
Yeah, no, I went to the Great Wint the next year, and that was just like you're saying. It's just great. They brought so many people together, the Clifford Ball, and created the festival scene.
And after the Clifford Ball, since this tour was the first tour, Lake Placid was the first show, I don't know this, but I have to imagine that they were just bursting with confidence at that point. Like, look what we just accomplished. We threw a festival and everybody came, and they were the only bands on the bill, the only band on the bill. They, most of those 60,000, 70,000 person festivals are for huge lineups. This is just it's not just a Phish concert, but Phish is the only band there on the bill. And when you look at the tour for the fall 96 after the Clifford Ball, it's quite extensive. It was 35 shows over 7 weeks. So that's 5 shows a week average.
Yeah, that seems like a lot. And it seems like they even carried that energy throughout the fall tour.
And I would argue it got more and more energetic as they went on, as their tours tended to do those days.
Yeah, and if I have anything to say by the last show of the tour, it was all out energy.
But looking at the fall 96 route, it can be divided, the way I looked at it, into 3 legs. Leg 1 was the East Coast, which was Lake Placid, moving to 2 shows in Pennsylvania. Then they went midweek at Madison Square Garden. They played it on New Year's Eve about 10 months prior, but now they were so confident that they could just play it on I remember it was a Tuesday and a Wednesday in the middle of New York City, and it no longer had that mystique, in my opinion. Like, it wasn't, they had reached the summit already. So for them to do it another time wasn't as huge a deal.
Right. They hit that plateau. So,
and
those MSG shows.
Yeah. And I had gotten into Phish, like I said, that previous summer, or like July or August of 1996. So when I found out that they were playing Madison Square Garden, I wanted to go so bad, but I was only 14.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, man, you said you wouldn't be sure how to handle New Year's Eve in New York City. If you're 14 years old on a Tuesday and Wednesday night, school nights, going to see this band Phish, who in 1996, if you were my parents, all you knew is that, they're the Grateful Dead. I'm not letting my 14-year-old go.
Yeah, exactly.
So I missed those shows.
2 nights, yeah.
Yeah, 2 nights in a row.
Were generally, I started touring in 96, and so they were generally supportive, like, he's just going to go see a concert. Like, yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, my parents were as permissive as they were, because I did see Phish the next year when I was 15 at Madison Square Garden also. So, they were very permissive. I went obviously by myself or with a friend, but that was just a little too young. Yeah. But after those midweek MSG shows, they played almost exclusively arenas throughout Hartford, Hampton, Charlotte, up and down the East Coast, with, of course, you mentioned this, a notable stop in Atlanta for Remain in Light, that Halloween show that reinvigorated them for the coming 1997 year. And that leg ended on November 3rd in Gainesville. So a little less than a month, about 3 weeks from New York to Florida. And then leg 2 focused on the Midwest. They took a 3-day break after that Gainesville show. They picked it up in Knoxville on November 6th. And then they made their way across the Southeast. They went through Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri. The way I looked at it when I checked out this map is basically, if Phish toured alongside the Major League Baseball divisions, this was the Central Division tour.
I don't know a lot about baseball, so I'll just take your word for that.
Yeah. It's mostly the middle of the country, but from Kansas City north.
Okay.
So those were the major cities, kind of like Rust Belt cities, that the band hit on the second leg. And then they took another 3-day break from November 19th in Kansas City, and then it picked up in Spokane, Washington. And then they went along the West Coast, including a show in Vancouver, 3 shows in California, both north and south. And then they ended up, as you well know, in the Southwest, with today's show closing this long, long tour.
What a fall. Like, I hit the first show of summer tour and the last show of fall tour. And even though those are the only 2 shows I hit, they were just fabulous and never looked back.
And this was one of the last tours, in my opinion, that you could go see show to show, probably paying for your next ticket with the cash you had in your wallet, or with whatever you made the night before selling beers or burritos on lot. Tickets were something like $23 or $22.
$25. I remember in 2003, after the first hiatus, I didn't have the best feelings about them because they abandoned me for 3 years. But my dad was like, I'm going to buy you tickets for your birthday. And that's when I went to the USANA show. And it was great still going back. But the tickets were $50 at that point. And I was like, I'm not going to buy $50 tickets. This is highway robbery.
How innocent we were
That's right.
In 2004. I remember when they were doing their last run at the time, from Camden up to Coventry. I went down to that Camden show without a ticket. And I remember pulling off the side of the highway. Someone through our car windows, we were yelling at each other. Do you have an extra? Yes, I have an extra. And we pulled off the exit. We pulled over into some parking lot. He asked for $80.
Oh my gosh.
In 2004. To me, that was literally highway robbery because we pulled off the highway and that's what he charged me. And I paid it.
And it was just for Camden too, right?
Yeah, which wasn't that good of a show.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's gotten pricey. I think I've only paid over cost once, and it was for a Halloween show.
Yeah, that might have been the last time. I think I kind of made a vow to myself after that.
Yeah, and everybody gets in. You just got to put some effort in.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the legacy of this show before we go into it song by song. So this show, December 6th, 96 at the Aladdin in Las Vegas, it was heralded right after it was played. I used to go to a store, a head shop near me called Prime Cuts, where they would give or sell, but only charge the price of the blank plus $1 for the man hours to record it. They would sell tapes of Phish and the Grateful Dead and a lot of different jam bands. And the thing about them was they always had the most recent shows on tape. So I got this tape very soon after it was played. So that's why it was one of my first. And this was probably the first time I ever heard Harry Hood or Wilson or You Enjoy Myself, because I didn't have Junta yet. So this show completely blew my mind. I never heard Peaches and Regalia before, whether by Zappa or Phish. So this was a true exposure for me. I never heard Cars, Trucks, and Buses before this. So to me, like I mentioned at the top of this talk, was a real mind blower. It opened everything up for me.
Yeah, and these are some great versions of it as well. It was also my first tape, but it's because I got home and I hopped on Rec Music Phish, and I was just like, I have to have it. Whatever I have to do to get it. And then I just played it out in my car.
Yeah, you were lucky and definitely ahead of the game. Well, how old were you at the time this was played, in the fall or winter of 96?
I was 16. So I just turned 16. I'd been on Rec Music Phish for a couple of years. My dad was like one of the first people I knew that was like a big fan of the internet. So we would go to the library and he would look up whatever he was looking up, and I'd hop on Rec Music Phish and talk about shows. And I think that really drove the excitement for me, because I could automatically connect with the community that wasn't there in Utah.
You know what? One day we could do a whole episode just about the internet's role in Phish's popularity and amongst the fan base. Because I remember around this time in 96, I was in middle school. So I was 13 or 14 years old. I was 14 when this show was played in December. And I just remember that, to me, the internet was America Online. And they had that option for a browser, like Netscape Navigator. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how to use it. It would open a new screen and I wouldn't know what to type in the address bar. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, why would anyone need this? Everything's on AOL. So to me, Rec Music Phish it didn't exist as far as I knew. There was the Phish Bowl chat room on America Online that Mike Gordon would pop in occasionally.
I never used America Online. We would just log into the library, and my dad showed me how to find the boards and stuff, which was great.
I didn't know about blanks and postage. I didn't know about relics. So I was kind of onto Prime Cuts and whatever I could find.
I have to confess that I got the tape in with blanks and postage, and I never ended up sending the tape back out. So if you're listening and you're out there, I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you now.
I'm Jewish, but I could play the role of a priest right now as confession. So
yeah, good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolved of your Phish sins.
It's been weighing me down since the show.
And so for me, and then we'll wrap this up and get to the show, because I'm really excited for this Wilson opener. But before we get to it, 96, when I started this podcast, I always saw it as a, quote, in-between year for Phish, because everyone knows the outrageousness of 95 with its crazy experimentalism and really balls to the wall rock and roll, and 97's cow funk. 96 was often seen or is often seen as like a transition year. I read up a little bit in research for this, and Mr. Minor, the famous, or he's not as prolific now, but he called 96 the forgotten year, quote unquote. But when you stop and think about it, yeah, I see you shaking your head.
Travesty.
Well, I subscribed to that for a while, but then when I started this podcast and dug into a lot of mid-90s Phish, I have to disagree because there's so much in 96. Just thinking off the top of my head, there's the Halloween show, obviously, Remain in Light, that I mentioned. There's the next show, which was in West Palm Beach on November 2nd, which is a huge high point, under the radar, black sheep of all-time great Phish shows, if anyone out there hasn't heard it.
Yeah, check that one out.
Yep. There's the Bathtub Gin from the Rupp Arena in Lexington, Kentucky, November 7th. And so 96, I mean, of course, the Clifford Ball, but 96 may not have been a hugely transitional year with a brand new direction for Phish, but it's got huge highlights.
Yeah, and I feel like almost like the growth from 95 to 97 is what 96 is all about. Like you're saying, that the craziness of 95 and the funk of 97, there definitely is like that in between ground there that 96 just, I don't know, I'm biased, obviously, because that's
why you're here.
So I'm not going to listen to anybody talk trash at 96.
Good. You don't have to.
Nice.
And this show specifically was released on November 20th, 2007 as its own album, a triple album, Phish Live in Vegas. And unless I didn't do my homework right, what I found is that this was the first time that Phish had ever played Las Vegas. Can you confirm or deny that?
I think it was. I was only into them in 95, and I would have gone in 95 if they played in 95. So I'm pretty sure it was the first one.
Let's wrap up this segment by asking, why do you have attendance bias toward this show?
First is just the set list of the show. It's just great. If you look at it, I think about the second set as like a Mike song, Weekapog sandwich. You got Julius as the bread and Good Times, Bad Times as the bread, and some condiments in there. Obviously, this was my second show. I didn't have a ticket to the show, but all my friends were going. So I was like, I'm going to go. I'm going to get a ticket. So I hopped in their car, went down there, hit the lot. I didn't spend much time in the lot, got a little bit of food, and went straight to the box office because I was like, that's where I'm going to be able to get a ticket. I hung out at the box office for about an hour. They didn't have any tickets for me. And finally, they opened the window and they're like, hey, we have some tickets for you. And I look at the guy next to me and think with this like bewildered look, like it wasn't real. And he's like, yeah, it's real. Go buy your tickets. So I walk up there and I buy 2 tickets for me and my buddy. And they hand me the ticket and there's 3rd row seats. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm so excited. We go inside the show and we get up to our seats and the guys sitting next to us are like, you guys wish you had seats this good. And we're like, well, we're sitting right here. And they're like, oh, great. Well, we'll be dancing tonight, I guess. So will we. A lot of it comes down to the encore, because I grew up the son of a obsessive Elvis fan. My mother would go to Memphis twice a year, once in January and once in August for the celebration of Elvis's birth and his death. And she'd hang out there for 2 weeks, with that community as it was. So by this point in my life, she had done that, every year for 10 years. And I had listened to Elvis my whole life. I came very close to being named Elvis. Fortunately, my dad said that, like, no, that's not going to be it. We're going to give him a solid name. And so during the whole show, I was like, man, like, I really enjoy this. And I feel like Trey's talking to me, man. And then they brought the Elvises out at the very end. And I was sold on the fact that he was like a mind reader, or either that or that the coincidences were just so much that I just lost it. I just like laughed the whole show. Like it felt like Phish knew me, and they utilized their music to like tell me a story, and I felt like Jimmy in the story.
Oh.
So I'm very biased about the show.
I have a question that may be for your mother then.
Okay.
Because you said they brought the Elvises on stage. Is the plural of Elvises, or is it Elvi?
I'd probably always just say Elvis's.
Okay.
And I think that there's like a movie with the red Elvises. They're like a Russian Elvis impersonators. So I'd say Elvis's. Yeah.
All right. Noted.
Set 1.
So the first set starts with Wilson. And I brought this up a little bit earlier with Las Vegas being pretty much the vacation destination for partiers in the United States, plus a Phish show, plus the first time Phish has ever played in this party city. And it's the tour closer, which we know they're always excited to play and thank the crew and everyone for being supportive of them. It sounded so crazy and energetic. What do you remember from this opener of the first set?
I remember being really excited to hear Wilson because I knew about the crowd chant, and I was excited to be a part of it. I already knew Wilson from a live one and from the Game Henge tapes I knew, so I was excited to say Wilson sucks. I was up front, so I felt like it was really an intimate setting for me, but you could hear how loud the chants were from behind me. And you can tell, like, when they get into Wilson, Trey's just like going 100 miles an hour. I don't know if they were like setting the tone for the whole show. And I was 16, so I didn't do too much partying. I hid my Sammy Smiths in my hoodie pocket, of course, when I was in the lot. But and then some party favors. But aside from that, I was just kind of locked in. But hearing the volume behind me like made me feel special and made me feel part of something.
Well said. Because I was thinking back to what I knew listening to these tapes or looking over the J cards of them. I think about how either uninformed or naive, I may say, I was about Phish. I may not have even understood the concept of different sets in a show. So I listened to this tape over and over again, not quite realizing that it opened with Wilson, that it was the beginning of the whole show, because to me, it was just press play. And that's the beginning of the tape, like it would be the beginning of an album. So now hearing it more in context, it even makes me think with an even more critical ear of that. And critical, I mean, just think more about it, that it's opening a whole show with what we love as an opener. Wilson's one of the best. Right after it's over, they go immediately into Peaches in Regalia, which now is a pretty big rarity. But back then, it's funny with Peaches, they almost get rashes of it, almost like it's a cold. Like they'll catch it and they'll play it a few times in a few short shows and short spurts, and then it'll disappear again for years.
Like they gotta kind of put it in their system and get it back out of their system.
Yeah, and it's
never
flawless.
Heard of this, and I was like just excited. Like, what is this? I was excited to think that I'm hearing a Phish song I've never heard before, not knowing that it was Zappa. I had like listened to a little bit of Zappa with one of those like Columbia House tape.
Yep. Rolling in it for the money.
Yeah, that's right. And so I knew a couple of his classics like Don't Eat the Yellow Snow and Montana and stuff, but I didn't know Peaches. And I wanted to come back.
Yeah, of course. I've seen it maybe 3 times total, but they could play it every show.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy with that. After that is Poor Heart, which when I keep thinking back, I have a very specific memory of listening to the show in the back of my parents' Pontiac, I think it was. And I think I picked this tape because they played Poor Heart, because the album that got me into it was A Picture of Nectar, and Poor Heart's on A Picture of Nectar. So to me, this must be a good show. I always picked out the songs I knew. So they played Poor Heart, and then one of the best 2001s I've ever heard.
Yeah, the Poor Heart. I'm a fan of it. It's not my favorite song, but I will love the studio albums, and I still do. I think that it's good to listen to the studio albums before you see a live show. And I know a lot of people are like, no, it's the live jams. But I'm like, you got to have a reference point to get those live jams. And so Poor Heart was good. When 2001 started, I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was some like drawn out funk jam. And I'm like, this is great. This is great. And I had this like weird, like, I know this beat. Like it was in my DNA, this beat. And I didn't get until, like you mentioned on the notes, like 4:30 was when they bring in the white lights, the dun dun dun. And at that point, I freaked out because Elvis opens all of his shows from like 70 to 77 with 2001, but it's like all big band, and he comes out with his karate moves and everything. So I knew the song, and I was just I started to think about this whole like rock star mythos. Elvis is the king of rock. And when you see Phish sometimes, I feel like they just make a mockery of that whole thing, but they're still rock stars. Like how Mike used to dress up as a rock star because he's like, I'm a rock star, I might as well dress like one. And so I was like on this like whole rock star mythos kick the whole night. And that one I just laughed because I'm like, oh yeah, they're basically playing Elvis to me, which they weren't at that point.
Well, Elvis and Superbad. They had a Superbad tease in about 7 minutes, which if you listen to enough 2001's versions of 2001, it comes and goes. They play this, Trey plays this little riff every now and again, but lots of wah-wah funk. I had the thought listening to this that they're really starting to capitalize on that Remain in Light that they just played like a month earlier, but they're already starting to reap the benefits of it. It's already seeping through.
I had never listened to the Remain in Light until like 1999. And then when I heard it, I just played it over and over and over.
Sure.
Oh, it's so good.
After 2001 is over, they kick right into Llama. My only note is what a high-powered set. It hasn't let up for a second. This would be, they played, as we mentioned earlier, Madison Square Garden this past April, and the second night and the fourth night both had first sets that didn't let up. Like there were no bathroom songs. That's kind of my barometer. Like, when do I go pee? Yeah. And this set so far, including the next song, You Enjoy Myself, doesn't have any.
I don't think I left my seat the whole show. With Llama, I definitely high powered. I think I was still in my head about 2001. So it kind of passed me by. I liked it, I've heard it before, or I had heard it before by this point. But the 2001 I was just laughing about.
And You Enjoy Myself is fabulous. It's about 26 minutes long. It has a very typical composed section. That's why it's composed. But right away, they play with the dynamics. There's a great trampoline and bass and drum section at 10 minutes. The part that really grabs me, and I listened to it over and over again since you brought this show up, it's around 17 minutes that I know Les Claypool comes on at the end of the show, but it sounds like there's 3 bass players already on it. That bass madness.
Yeah, Mike is just going crazy. And I think it's because, like, in your notes, you mentioned that Trey is on his percussion kit. So I don't know if Mike took that as like, well, I'm going to tear this thing apart while Trey's playing the drums over there. But yeah, I listened back to it and it's out of control. And I didn't know how special YEM was as a first set. I was just excited, like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to get a local jam out of it. We're going to have at least 10, 15 minutes.
And this may be the most memorable vocal jam there ever was. The Donuts, right? I Love Donuts.
Yeah, because I think it has actual lyrics in it. I don't know of any other YEM that where they say something.
I love donuts. Donuts, 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 I love donuts.
think there was a guy with a fucking Go Nuts t-shirt in front of Trey. And so he saw that. So you can hear Trey say, that guy loves donuts.
Oh.
Yeah, in the jam.
I don't like the vocal jam anymore. That's usually when I would go to the bathroom. But when I first heard this track, I said, oh, this is really fun. And I laughed out loud. And so I said, all right, well, ever you enjoy myself must be really fun like this.
Yeah, you would hope.
And I learned otherwise soon enough.
I like the lights during the vocal jam.
Well, of course. Yeah. It's really in a spaceship during that part.
Exactly.
After You Enjoy Myself, they play Cars, Trucks, and Buses, which I'm always happy to hear it. It's a nice cool down song. They played it at my first show, so I have sentimental value attached to it. And jazz Phish is underrated, underrepresented.
I think that was a big reason why I liked Phish coming out of the gate with like Manteca and I want to say Junta. It's kind of jazzy. And I just love Cars, Trucks, and Buses ever since I heard it on Billy Breathes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I call it for every opener because I want to hear it for every single opener. Either that or Party Time. Because it's just like, it sets a real fun tone. And it's great. It's a good, fun song. And especially if you've been West Coast tour, it's not like you drive 2 hours and get to another show. It's like, here's your 12-hour drive where you've passed who knows how many cars, trucks, and buses. So it's appropriate sometimes.
So to close the set, we're ready at the end of it, was Down with Disease and Frankenstein. Down with Disease is a really nice call. And it's surprising looking back with our current vision to hear it at the end of a first set, right? I've gotten so used to it being the second set opener.
Yeah, this one definitely was fun. I'm not the biggest fan of Down with Disease, specifically because of the lyrics. I'm real sensitive, so like I don't want them to stop playing and be on their way. But it's always a good like rock and roll jam. And I had never heard Frankenstein either. So I just thought that was another like, oh, this is a crazy Phish jam.
I knew Frankenstein from Beavis and Butthead, to be honest, really? when they would do their little that's how I knew it.
Oh, that's crazy because I've seen the Down with Disease video on Beavis and Butthead.
Right, that too.
I never thought about Frankenstein. That's funny.
Yeah,
I have to go back and watch it. One of my favorite programs as a 12-year-old.
Set 2.
And set 2 opens with Julius, which is, compared to today, another unusual song placement. It's almost always a set closer or an encore, kind of mixed in with Character Zero or Tweezer Reprise here or there.
It seemed like they were just keeping the energy going because they come out with Julius, and I always feel like it's like a big band song, and it felt like that. It plays like that.
I don't know. I wrote down, who knew that Phish is a rockabilly swing band?
Yeah.
Like a dual headlining tour with the Stray Cats. You know, there's some parts here where it's just Trey is in it to win it.
right? And I when I think back about it, I wonder if they're like hinting at the whole Elvis thing because his rockabilly style and all of that. I love Julius because it's just like it's it's big Fish to me. Especially the album. You got the backup singers, you got the giant country horns. When I first started getting into Fish, I thought that it was like a 10-piece band because of the giant country horns. I thought it was like one of those big, huge bands. And I'm like, four guys are doing this? It's crazy.
After Down with Disease is Sparkle, which is, I would call it a warm up for the second set. They're still getting there. But then the second set proper really kicks into gear with, we'll go over them, but just on a set list. So if you haven't heard this show and you're listening to this episode, just picture seeing this on Phish.net on a show today. Mike Song, Simple, Harry Hood, Weekapaw Groove, Sweet Adeline, and a Good Times, Bad Times closer. And that's not even getting to the encore, which we will get to.
Talk about attendance bias. Oh,
yeah, no kidding. So
yeah,
I wrote
Sparkle is like the mayonnaise on the second set sandwich. Like,
so the condiments were done. The pickles and onions have already been served. Now we're getting to the real flavor.
Yeah, the meat and the veggies.
So Mike's song, 96 was a great year for Mike's. Page's organ does a lot of work on it. And then the minute I say that, I wrote that there's not much going on at about 5 minutes. But the minute I say that, by 6 minutes, there's just like, and I wrote a Frankenstein sort of groove. And then there's the siren effect. It sounds like Page wants to go to the coda, but they're not finished. Like there's a lot going on in this Mike song. It's very dense in the middle.
Yeah, Mike's, I was so excited because at that point in time, Mike's was probably my favorite song. And it could have been because it's like, I know I'm going to get 3 songs out of this jam.
Right.
I really like Weekapaw as well. And yeah, at the very end, you can hear Trey just like ringing out the jam. Like he's not letting it go.
The Simple to me is the highlight of the show, even more so than the encore, although I do love the encore, but musically speaking, at the very least, gags aside and fun aside, if I dare say that, the Simple is really pleasant for me. It gets complex. There's the crowd picks up on all the different moves that the band is doing. It's full-blown rock. It's super mellow jazz. It's like subtle transformations with interband play all within the same package. I could listen to the Simple over and over and over again.
Simple, controversial opinion, is not my favorite song. Like the first composed section is My Bathroom Break. But going after the like jam start, when the jam starts, it definitely gets really, really beautiful in the whole thing. And it tied into that whole rock star mythos thing because it's like everybody wants to be in a band. At the very end of it, I felt like they were about to drop into I Am Hydrogen because it's kind of light and airy. But it doesn't. It goes right into Hood.
Yeah, and this Hood, at the beginning of it, it takes a lot for me to appreciate Harry Hood. And maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. I think because after this one, this was the first Harry Hood I think I ever heard. And then when I got into a live one, it's kind of like, where do you go from there? Mm-hmm. So it's because I know what they are capable of that it's really hard for me to be impressed by Harry Hood. Yeah. Silly as that sounds, very snobby, but I mean, I love it, of course. But when you hear something like this Harry Hood, it really makes you wonder how, what else could I have heard? Why wasn't I born 8 years earlier?
Yeah, exactly. Why have I already missed so many shows? This Harry Hood, I think, changed my mind about my favorite song. And after it was like Mike's was out of the picture at this point. It's just so beautiful. And it has like, a few different sections in it. It's got the little reggae. It's got almost some metal. And then it has just like beautiful transcendence at the end. I just love it. Love it.
That transcendence at the end is what does it for me.
Yeah.
It's an easy part to like, of course, but that's why we all like it. I have a feeling that if I were there, it, like you just said, or just kind of implied, it would change the way I looked at, if not just Phish, maybe everything in my life.
Yeah, it holds a very special place in my heart. Like I could hear it at every show.
I wrote in my notes that this is the jam at about 13 and a half minutes. Or this is akin to the best Hoods of the early and mid 90s of 93 and 94. And to me, that's the highest praise you could give a song like Harry Hood. It's as good as it was in 94.
It's so good.
I like what you said in the notes. You said the end is Phish I live for stuff.
Yeah, it is Phish I live for, because you can, like, I mentioned it in a different part of the notes, but I think I deleted it. But it's like that, like, hard driving, the tempo's going up, you can still dance to it. Just like the energy building that, Trey is a master of.
And Fishman too focuses very heavy on the toms.
Yeah.
As a drummer, I always think, all right, he's going to hit that crash cymbal and then go back into the straightforward beat to end the song.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like he's never going to do it. It's his version of building tension before the release. And Trey and him, we know that they're interconnected, that they're a cat and mouse team, and they build on each other so much for so long. Like you find your fingernails digging into your palms while a huge smile spreads across your face. I might be speaking for myself, but I imagine a lot of people.
No, I agree. And I'm like, I'm hoping to get this feeling for at least like 3 or 4 more minutes, like keep this jam going.
And they close this suite with Weekapog, traditionally. Yeah. And it's funny because they go right into it from the end of Harry Hood. And within 20 seconds, I wouldn't say you forgot that Harry Hood was played, but you're already somewhere completely different in the universe.
Yeah, that energy in the Weekapog still is, it keeps going. Like it just wants, it almost felt like Trey and them were so excited to get to the encore that they're just like busting out all their great tunes. They're singing them a little bit faster, knowing that they've got to fill like an hour encore or something. And then the week of stop groove in it.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that until like a couple of years afterwards. Someone wrote an article about it. I had to go back and listen. It's crazy that they stopped, so I clapped, thinking the song's over, and then just right back into it with the same level of intensity, if not higher. It's beauty and craftsmanship.
Yeah, and dynamics too, which would be a huge player in the coming year of 1997. There's parts in this Weekapog, I think it's a little bit after 7 minutes, that they quiet down, but they don't slow down.
Yeah.
Which, as a musician, and I call myself a musician in quotes, but any musician would tell you is probably one of the hardest things in the world to do, to play quieter, but not change your tempo. And they do it like it's just any other day.
Right. You can almost hear, I think it's Fishman, but you hit at like 7:30 or something, and you can hear, I think it's Fishman say, yeah. And then it starts to get slower, and Trey starts hitting these individual notes that reminds, and I'm biased here, so they sound like rockabilly 50s music. I want to say Elvis because
you always want to say Elvis.
Well, yeah, because that's what the show's about. But I think it's more like Santo and Johnny. I don't remember the exact song, but that just individual notes. If you go back and listen to it, he hits them like 6 or 7 times, and it has that 50s feel to it. To me.
After Weekapog, they closed the set with Sweet Adeline, which is a great genre whiplash. I thought that being there, obviously it sounds super fun, but as tripped out as some of the other music and energetic as some of the other music was, this must have been completely weird in a totally different direction. 10 minutes ago, you're in this psychedelic, crazy explosion of mindfuckery, and now you're watching a barbershop quartet.
Yeah, and that adds to like my love and the humor of Phish, because I was right up front, so I could hear it, because they did it without a microphone. So on the playback, all you can hear is people like, shut up,
Yeah.
keep it down. But I was like right up front, and it was like a real calming time for me because I'm like, this is great. Like no other band does this.
And they close it with Good Times, Bad Times, which is an amazing closer. And you've been talking a lot about kind of placing oneself into the ultimate pipe dream of being a rock star.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate rock star song. It's fun on all instruments.
Yeah, exactly. And when I think of Trey playing it too, I think of like Trey being a 15-year-old in his basement, practicing Good Times, Bad Times licks, wanting to be a rock star. And then he's able to play it in front of, thousands of people, and dude's a rock star now. So I was still like kind of going with that, even with the barbershop quartet that was right before it.
And the encore is a half hour long. Before we get into the breakdown song by song, I just want to read it out loud for people who have not been fortunate enough yet to hear it. So they open with Harpua, which I think has only been done maybe twice before. Harpua into Wildwood Weed, which is a Primus song, and Les Claypool and Larry Lalonde of Primus were on stage for this. Back into Harpua, into an old country western song called I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart that Shawn mentioned earlier with yodelers. Back into Harpua. And then to close the whole entire thing, they play Suspicious Minds. And then again, Suspicious Minds with 4 Elvises, I'll say properly. And then back to Harpua, and then they close the whole thing with Susie Greenberg. I had a recent episode I recorded with Scott Marks of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation. He chose to talk about the Thank You Encore from Dick's in 2015, where everyone made such a huge deal that they encored with Harpua. And that was something like a 46-minute encore. It was some ridiculous number.
I've been waiting for Harpua all summer long. And then when they hit that, I was like, yeah, stoked.
Yeah, tell me, I'm not even going to talk about this. I want to hear it straight from you because you were there. What was happening? What was going on in your mind? What did you think at the time? What do you think now? Bring us through this mind-blowing encore that seems to encapsulate everything that's great about Las Vegas in 36 minutes.
Good Times, Bad Times ended, so I'm just excited for just whatever encore we're going to get. They come out, just the 4 band members, and Trey's like, we're going to bring a couple friends up with us. And I was like, oh, this is exciting, special guests. And they're like, Larry and Les from Primus. And I'm like, oh, I'm a huge Primus fan. I'd already seen them once, I feel like, by that point. And so I'm like, wait, these guys like Primus? Like, they're even cooler to me now. This is great. And, I'm a 16-year-old kid at a Phish show. So Cannabis and I, we were friends. So the Wildwood Weed song was great. It's actually not a Primus song. It's an older country song. I don't know exactly.
Thank you.
But it was a cover because I had to go look into it. It sounds a little older. It's totally funny though, them talking about like growing weed and some
chewing on it too, right?
Chewing on it, yeah.
On a wildwood flower grew out on the farm, and we never knowed what it was called. Some say it's a flower, and some say it's a weed. Well, I never gave it much thought. And one day I was out there talking to my brother, and I reached down for a weed to chew on. Things got fuzzy and things got blurry, and then everything was gone. I didn't know what it was, but I go beat the hell out of sniff a burner. When I finally came to, there's my brother Bill. He says, now what's wrong with your eyes? I said, I don't know, I'm just chewing on this here weed. He says, well, let me give it a try. It took the rest of that day, and most of the night, to try and find my brother Bill. I caught up with him about 5 o'clock the next morning, and he was naked, singing on a windmill. Said he flew up there. I had to fly up and get him down because he was half naked. Well, smoking them weeds became kind of a habit around that park. We never seen no harm. We thought it was kind of handy. You take a trip and never leave the farm.
Well, I'll tell you, when Les Claypool sings it, he makes any song sound like a Primus song. And just a little aside, speaking of Elvis, in 2006, when I was at Bonnaroo, Oysterhead was playing there. And the way I knew that it was Oysterhead is because I heard the most ridiculous, weird version of Jailhouse Rock.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of Elvis, but it was Les Claypooling Jailhouse Rock.
With
so
Oysterhead?
Yes, with Oysterhead.
Nice.
So it was like this heavy, fuzzy bass you could hear from a half a mile away. And then the voice going, run to the party and out of jail. All right, well, that's Les Claypool, but it's
Right.
Elvis.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, I just wanted to add that in since Elvis has
Oh,
been
that's
on
great.
the
I'm
table.
gonna go look at that after we're done here.
Yeah.
So Primus was great. They were singing about weed, and then it kind of goes back into Harpua, and he starts to tell a story about the suburban kid, bored, wants to go on an adventure, and I totally identified with that because that's exactly what I did. I was bored, went on an adventure, and so they go back in that, give part of the story, and then they bring "I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart" with another Larry Lalonde. I think he's from the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and the two yodelers. And at this point, going through the whole show, and they brought out Primus, and now we're like watching the yodelers. I was just like laughing, and my buddy next to me was like, "What is going on?" And the two guys who weren't expecting that we were going to be sitting next to them, they were just having the best time. Once that ends, it goes back into Harpua, and then they start talking about the whole Jimmy's got to battle the Elvises. So they bring the Elvises out on stage, and they start singing Suspicious Minds. And finally, I think that Fishman walked back away during the yodelers, and he comes out with a cape, with the lights on, and outsings them, of course. The Elvis impersonators could only do so much when you're, competing against John Fishman. So at this point, with my background being about Elvis, I wake up and eat breakfast next to a giant velvet Elvis. I was just over the moon. Like, this isn't real. My buddy standing next to me was just like looking at me and laughing because he knew that I was around Elvis my whole life. So it was just so funny to me that they like brought it all around. Looking back, I know that it's like Elvis is just a Vegas staple, and I'm identifying too much with it, but it didn't care at the time. It just made me happy and made me decide like I'm never gonna stop seeing this band.
And to skip ahead, I'm already saying I want to have you back on to talk about that November 2nd, 98 show.
Yeah, anytime.
That also has, probably the most well-known Harpua, where Jimmy, in 96, he wants to go on an adventure and leave the suburbs. But in 98, he finds Vegas to be too crazy and too much of a downer scene. So he leaves.
I felt like in 96, Trey was telling my story, and in 98, Trey was telling his story.
Yeah.
Because I was at that Halloween show, and Ghost comes on at the very end, and I'm like, this is going to be 40 minutes. So I walk into the bathroom, and then I hear applause, and the show's over. So I didn't know what had happened, and I didn't know until after the fact that it was just crazy for him.
But I can't wait. We'll get there. Let's table that conversation. And then after the whole Harpua thing, we're up to Susie Greenberg, which I guess was played for the Slot Machine lyric, but it's really fun when you listen back to it. There's a lot of really great versions of Susie Greenberg. And I heard Larry Lalonde all over this one because I didn't hear much of him throughout the encore.
Yeah.
But there are parts of this around a minute 30. There's a Claypool bass solo at 3. At 4 minutes, both guys, Larry Lalonde and Les Claypool, get a little extra time in the sun. And then Elvis gets it singing Susie Greenberg as Susie Q. So even something as pedestrian as Susie Greenberg can be was really, bringing everyone to their feet.
Oh yeah, I think I like Susie because it's fun, it's upbeat, it's light, and I think that the majority of the guests had walked off during the very end of Harpua. like before the fight part. And then they brought them all back on during Susie, like, everybody get back on stage and let's just jam this thing out. Funny little note about this kind of weed-based show, Wildwood Weed. Jimmy takes his life savings, which is $12, and he bets it on 17. And had he won, he would have come away with $420. Which I'm like, Trey's doing that math. It's too much.
Sounds like Trey lost a couple bucks.
Yeah, exactly. But the Susie Q was great, being part of Susie Greenberg and ending the show like that. I was just on cloud nine.
Shawn Fausett of Colorado, thank you so much for coming on today to talk about a show that is legendary. I think that's a fair reputation. That's a fair word to describe December 6, 96 at the Aladdin, Phish's premiere show in Las Vegas, and a premiere show not only of 96, but of Phish's career. So anyone out there who hasn't listened, do yourself a favor, listen to it, and then come back and listen to this episode again. But Shawn, thank you for sharing. I definitely look forward to having you back to talk about the sequel of sorts, the spiritual sequel of this when we get to Salt Lake City. I already have a billion questions running through my head, but thank you for taking the time and talking to me and sharing with the Attendance Bias audience about this Phish show in Las Vegas, 96.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great time, and I'm so excited to come back for the Dark Side show.
And that's it for today's conversation with Shawn Fausett about December 6th, 1996 at the Aladdin in Las Vegas. And to make sure that we got everything right and to double check things, it's time for the Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Shawn's first show was on August 2nd, 1996 at the Wolf Mountain Amphitheater in Park City, Utah. As Shawn mentioned, the show opens with Page playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow on his theremin, a Punch You in the Eye encore, and lots of great stuff in between. The show was the debut of Page's theremin, and Somewhere Over the Rainbow was played for the first time since July 3rd, 1994, or a gap of 161 shows. There is a very good recording, an audience recording of the show, on Phish.in. When he was first getting into Phish, Shawn said that he and his friend would listen to a live one, the Gamehenge tape, and the Bomb Factory tape. In case you didn't know, the Bomb Factory tape is likely the second set of May 7th, 1994 at the Bomb Factory in Dallas, where Phish famously played a set-long version of Tweezer with multiple songs and jams intertwined within Tweezer itself. It certainly wasn't the first jammed-out Tweezer, but it was probably the first proper Tweezer fest. It's a stepping stone in Phish's live history and a must-listen for any fan. The Dark Side of the Moon show that Shawn and I referenced several times was played on November 2nd, 1998 at the E Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm hoping to do a full follow-up episode with Shawn about that show, but briefly, the attendance at that show was extremely low, and the band decided to, in quotes, punish the fans by playing an all-time great show, including the second set where the band fits all of Dark Side of the Moon, the Pink Floyd album, inside an extremely funny Harpua. It's an absolute must-listen, a monster of a show if you haven't heard it before. The dates of the Mohegan Sun Phish shows, where the venue also hosted a Little Miss Beauty pageant, were July 9th and 10th, 2019. I tried to do a little bit more research on the actual pageant being held that week in Mohegan Sun, but I stopped short when I found myself typing certain search terms on Google, even though it was literally just for this fact check. Shawn mentioned that he's never seen Phish at Madison Square Garden with, quote, all the Halloweens. I'm certain that he meant New Year's Eve, because Phish has never played MSG for Halloween, but I will be there if and when they ever do. When telling me about the best venues in Utah, Shawn attempts to list all of the times that Phish has played the state. After a little research, it turns out that, to date, Phish has played Utah 7 times. For what it's worth, Peaches in Regalia has been played a total of 86 times by Phish to date. During our discussion of Julius, Shawn says that the studio version of the song made him think that Phish was a big band because of the giant country horns, while the studio version of Julius on the album Hoist features a horn section. It's the horn section from Tower of Power, not the giant country horns. And finally, I mistakenly referred to Wildwood Weed as a Primus song, and Shawn immediately corrects me. Wildwood Weed was written by Don Bowman in 1964 as a parody country western tune. It was later recorded and released by Jim Stafford, which is its most well-known version. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Shawn Fausett for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow Attendance Bias on social media, mostly Instagram and Twitter. Reach out, say hi, and I'll send you a free sticker. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.